going to turn this over to our first-year medical student, Benjamin Barrett, and just give you a warm welcome. And thank you guys so much for attending.
Cool. Thank you. All right. You guys can hear me? Okay, good. All right. So the book, so I went traveling for a little bit. I'll go into it. It's called Similar Differences. The title of this talk in particular is A Journey Around the World and the Human Mentality. And you know who I am. So it wouldn't be a real talk without learning objectives. So really the purpose of giving this talk was to really offer a more personal view. We'll be going through a series of photos, and then I'll be kind of going through the chapters of my book right at the end. So, and the rest of that, it's essentially the ATSU Class of 2019 Honor Code, and I replaced a lot of the words from health, and I replaced it with kind of more people words. So instead of as a member of this class, I'm a member of the community. I pledge to commit myself to lifelong learning, self-improvement. You guys can read the rest. But really it was instead of patience, but treat my neighbors with empathy, humility, and patience. And kind of going through that, maintain a positive outlook to instill hope and optimism in myself and others, and serve not only in the capacity of not just a physician, but as a citizen and a leader in my community. So it's really, how do we make ourselves a better people? So a bit about the trip itself. The logistics of it, I went traveling across 23 countries across Asia, Europe, and North America. I'd never been to Asia, so this is kind of my first introduction to it. It was for 7 months, door to door. I say solo as in I was traveling alone, but most of the trip I was actually not alone. And this ended last year. Basically, I was traveling pretty light. I knew if I bought any souvenirs, I'd be carrying them for a couple months, so I really wasn't buying much. I had one backpack, a 65 liter, so just a big backpack. I had a journal, and this is actually where most of the ideas for the book came from. This was a journal that I took with me, and I filled it up cover to cover. Sorry, feedback. So that's where a lot of the material came from the book, so I wasn't just remembering everything. I had a phone on me. I was updating a travel blog, so this is for my parents' sanity, if anything. And also I was just adding photos so a couple of family friends could follow me. And again, contact with the outside world. I did read 3 books when I was traveling. The first one is this one. It's American Prometheus. It's about Robert Oppenheimer. He's the guy who invented the atom bomb, and it basically goes through, it took me pretty much the whole 7 months to read it. But it goes through his childhood and everything and the politics and basically every conversation from before World War II through the creation of the atom bomb and afterwards. So I really got to see a lot of the history from that point of view. Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. It's really an interesting book. He's a journalist, and you talk about in the blink of an eye what the judgments that we make about people. So if we see somebody a bit different of us than us, evolutionarily, it's been to our advantage to make a judgment and to distance ourselves. But I'll come up and I'll contrast myself with those ideas later in the talk. And then 3 Cups of Tea by Rellin and Mortensen. Greg Mortensen, he was an American in the 90s and early 2000s. He went to Pakistan and he was building schools and he was teaching math and science to people in very rural villages. And he was basically raising these people so that they could raise their own villages out of poverty. And he had a lot of competition from the Middle East. People came in, billions of dollars, and they built kind of these quote-unquote terrorist training camps. So it was really this sharp contrast between teaching math and science and letting people educate themselves versus this really indoctrination into a hateful regime. So a bit about the writing. Why did I do it? I initially planned to go traveling because I wanted to better understand my future patients. I knew there was going to be a very international group of people. Oh, I forgot this demo. Maybe you guys can do it. So there's a bit of a demo. I'll keep talking. So in here, I want you to put golf balls first and then the rocks. If you can take that, put the rocks and then the golf balls. So social determinants of health, it's this concept that we all know about. It's really, if you understand the environment, then that affects the health. So, we can find all these zebras and horses in medicine, but really maybe the question we should be asking is who opened the gate and let all these animals out? So I took this on and extended this to people. It's a bit noisy. So for people, you have the environment, and you have and that environment creates a mentality, and from that mentality, we see behavior. So just like with health, we want to think upstream and the factors that affect health and disease. just like when we see behavior, we want to think upstream and really think about the mentalities and the environments that are creating these. So for this demo, I picked this up off the internet. They're struggling with that one. Okay, so the idea is you have rocks and you have pebbles, and the golf balls. So the golf balls are really what's important. And if you focus your life and you put the golf balls in first into the bottle, everything, all the noise kind of trickles around it, and that's really what's important. But again, we live in a world where there's a lot of news and everything. Fantastic. And you can see if you prioritize your life kind of around the wrong things, around all the behavior and the health and really everything that's downstream, you're really going to get yourself into kind of a trap. And the important things will really have a hard time fitting into place. So, thank you. Very speedy with that. All right, and the material for the book. So the 3 books that I mentioned, news, I had an app on my phone. I was going through about 20 or 30 news articles a day, just trying to keep in touch with the world. Conversations, I talked with people from all over the world about religion, politics, people in general, their cultures, their values, their philosophies. And really I put all those together, and I guess, of course, my observations. When I'm in these countries, what am I seeing, what am I listening to? I did 3 years of research at the Salk Institute in San Diego, and I say theoretical, because what this really did, if anything, was train my mind to really think that you can have this entire enormous wealth of knowledge, but really you attack the very basic fundamental questions that the entire field of this was vision neuroscience was based on. If you really understand the basic principles, in this case it was how the brain just processes light, that kind of helped train my mind to think more upstream. Also, in my spare time, I took medical, urban, and environmental sociology courses. My undergrad degree was in neuroscience. I was really interested in kind of mentalities and the way people think, so that put me into there. But in my free time, I did take these courses at UCSD, and that was kind of introduced me to social determinants of health and all that. And then coming clean is kind of my disclaimer, my personal beliefs. So I was raised for probably over 10, 15 years in being taught to think that I'm not responsible for everything that happens in the world around me, but I'm responsible for how I react to that environment. And as such, I'm fully responsible for my behavior. And if I'm responsible for my mentality, I'm also responsible for the immediate environment around myself. So you can see it's not just a linear, from left to right, but really you can go backwards as well. So the book itself is split into 3 parts. Part 1 is travel. It's a combination from that journal and also travel excerpts from the blog. Part 2 is person to person. I'll go into everything that goes between the interaction between 2 people. And then part 3 expands on that, and you say one person interacting with groups of people. So a couple remarks. I've been, I'd say, a fly on the wall for most of my life. I was listening a lot, but I wasn't really developing my own opinions. So I'm very grateful. I've had a lot of very positive feedback. When you say you write a book, people are very enthusiastic. But I just want to bring up 2 of the main points that some of the most blunt, but also some of the most enlightening remarks. So some of them, I'm sure you've already thought this. Everyone writes a book after they travel. Basically, it's an enlightening experience. You see new cultures, you learn a lot. What's so special about that? Well, that was from a mentor of mine in San Diego, and the response is actually from the introduction of the book, and it reads as this. All of the books I know discuss single matters, single cultures, events, time periods, etc. This book, an accumulation of experience and analysis, will attempt to make sense of all the stories we hear, both true and false, in order to discern a common theme of living and see how similar all of our differences actually are. So it's really trying to take what we've already seen before, but really try to expand on that. The second remark is actually from one of my peers here, and it says, so is this just like a Caucasian perspective of the world? And really, white people have gone around the world, and we kind of impose our perspectives. That's been done before, not very exciting, not very effective either. So the response is also from the book, from the introduction. It says, I'm not raising this book to raise awareness of specific issues. It is not my place to decide or judge what people choose to accept or not. Raising awareness of other mentalities for the purpose of understanding why those individuals behave or react to new situations is the first step towards reducing and preventing conflicts we frustratingly see repeating every day. So when we ask a question, again, it's very important to know not only what our biases and prejudices are when we ask the question, but also when we answer. So in order for me to go around the world and really take as objective a point of view as possible, I had to make sure that I was incredibly in touch with what my personal beliefs were. So part one, this map is actually from the travel blog. These are all the countries that I went to. The red dots, kind of a preliminary map before I went traveling. I changed it actually a little bit. But again, you can see several countries in Asia. I did 2 months in Europe. I had a train pass, so I was just kind of country hopping. And then flew over to North America. I did Montreal, and then Chicago, DC, and Raleigh. And then I came back home. So let's start traveling. So I was a little bit anxious going in. So I stayed with 2 friends in Tsukuba, Japan. This is the science city of Japan. I know we're big on mental health. So I put in this picture of a therapeutic robot in case ATSU was interested in going into that. This was a giant statue of Buddha, and again, that was the kind of the toe they had inside. I did put a lot of pictures of food during the presentation. I know people like food. So this is kitsune. As a vegetarian in Japan, it didn't quite work out well, and probably for most places in the world. So this was fried bean curd, absolutely delicious. I basically had that kind of most of my meals for 2 weeks, and I got kind of sick of it. And then this is okonomiyaki. This is a savory pancake, absolutely delicious. And then I put this because I actually went to a lot of museums when I was traveling, and I just wanted to include this. International Space Station. It includes all the flags from different countries from around the world that participated in that project. So, and I just thought it was a bit of a different perspective. Osaka, it's actually a great big city. You can kind of see this line. I think you can see my mouse. So that's actually the inside of this shopping mall, and it's just a shopping mall that goes down. And again, it's a big city, but on the right you can see that there's also small roads as well. This is Osaka Castle. It's in the center of the city. On the upper right, you see the inner moat and the outer moat on the bottom. So, Nara, Japan, this was kind of the deer city, so they have just deer around the city. You can feed them. I like this. This was a giant Buddhist temple, and there's a column, and if you could fit through the column, it was a lot of good luck. One guy got stuck and had to get pulled back out. In Kyoto, that's kind of the cultural city of Japan from my perspective, from what I saw. So there's kind of bamboo forest. There's a temple entirely built on wood that's over 600 years old. So really impressive that it's still there. This is the Orange Gates. Couple of kilometers, and then I like this sign. It says, so there's a monkey mountain. It says, the present height is about 109 meters. The monkey park is not only a monkey, the bird and the deer also look for. So even though the English isn't perfect, you really get the message. And then I met up with a New Zealander who actually taught me quite a bit, and we stopped by a cultural show. So we saw a bit of a play, there was a tea ceremony, the music, and a puppet show. In Tokyo, big city, it was a really interesting perspective to see the older generation, more the traditional aspect. The younger generation was getting a lot more involved in the Western culture and also anime. So you walk around the street and you see people in costumes. This was a capsule hotel, really interesting experience. I met 2 guys from Canadians. They're studying abroad in Singapore. And part of these capsule hotels is they have a salon where you go, you take a bath, you get naked, you clean yourself off, and then there's just baths of different temperatures. So it's actually pretty funny. It was the second one I'd been in, met these guys, and like 10, 15 minutes later, roll in the bathtub with each other. My only complaint is that eye level is pretty much like the eye level of everybody walking by, so I like just stare up a lot. Singapore is an absolutely fascinating city. Those 2 Canadians, they told me that they're studying abroad there. And they said it was really the only country that they know of where a girl could walk home at night, 3 in the morning, and have nothing happen. So there's a lot of rules in this. In the country, the fines are heavy, the punishments are really heavy. I think you get hit with a stick. It can put you out for a week, and they say if you can't get hit by again, they'll put you in the hospital, you'll get better, bring you back, and they'll hit you again to finish off the punishment. Needless to say, there's a lot of rules about spitting, smoking. I saw people spitting in the streets. People are people. I just like this one. There's no unnatural sex. I don't know what's going on there. But the people on the bottom right, there's a night safari. There are 2 guys from Bangalore. They're working for HP, and we did a night safari. The only problem was your pictures really don't turn out nicely on a night safari. And then I stand up for the vulnerable. This was a poster. I just really like that. It's kind of a message you don't see from the police in certain other countries. So here's a Hindu temple on the bottom, and on the left, there's a Buddhist Chinese temple. So Little India. Singapore, it's a fascinating case study because in one block you can have a synagogue, a mosque, a church, a temple, and it's really, there's a lot of rules, so you can't slander anyone. And if you get caught, there's heavy punishments, even for putting other people and religions down. This picture on the upper right, it really captured Singapore for me. Beautiful country, but there are cameras everywhere, and there's a lot of rules, but I felt completely safe there. And I knew as long as I wasn't going to be doing any crimes, that was not a problem. I stopped by one of the big mosques there, and I spoke with a lady for about an hour and a half about Islam and everything like that. I was wearing this robe, I was wearing it in shorts, so out of respect for the church. But I really like this picture. It says, one God, one humanity, one religion, many prophets. So you start at the top with Adam and Eve, and you go down on the left side, and you come down and you reach Muhammad. He's kind of the most recent prophet. And then you come down here, you get to Moses, and you come here and you get to Jesus Christ. So really put it all in one big perspective for me, and it kind of started to frame my mind around religion. In Phuket, Thailand, completely coincidental, I arrived during the Vegetarian Festival. It's about a 9-day festival. No joke, completely coincidental. Basically, up here in the upper right, you see people, these are the lady boys, and they're basically absorbing all the bad spirits from the people. At night, they had kind of firecrackers, big parade. The view on the bottom left is the view from the youth hostel. So that was basically smack dab in the middle of the old town. On the bottom right, they had parades in the mornings. As the day goes on, this was a form of purification through pain. And it was a 9-day festival. This was about day 5, and the pain gets more severe, or I guess therapies get. So I went at 5 in the morning one day, and I saw kind of the piercings and everything. The guy on the bottom right, it was so heavy, he had people carrying it, but it was too heavy, and he put him down, and they had to take him back out. But again, religious purification. Phuket, Thailand. On the top, I went traveling. We rented bikes with another guy, and you can see the views. We kind of went beach hopping around the island, and it's absolutely beautiful. On the bottom right, I did kind of the touristy cruise, and you can see on the bottom right, that's basically the image of the beach that you're getting through the tourist experience. So 2 different ways to travel. Khao Sok National Park is a bit north, giant freshwater lake. You can see there, I put foods there. This was a giant fried fish that they had. But I went swimming in the lake, in the river with some monks, and then they bought me a smoothie afterwards. They wouldn't even let me pay. So it was really nice talking to them. Kanchanaburi, Thailand. This was where history kind of comes into play. Forgive but not forget. So this is the side of the bridge over the River Kwai. When the Japanese occupied the place during World War II, there's 90,000 POWs from the Allies, so just basically from the Western forces, and more than double that of indigenous Asian populations. But they all died trying to build this railway for Japan across Southeast Asia, and Japan used it once before they lost the war. So you really kind of have to question, was the cost worth it? Kanchanaburi Safari Park, I volunteered at a safari park with animals. So we kind of took tigers, lions for a walk. I was playing with leopards. This was just a fun experience, just kind of to hang out with other people and animals. And this girl on the bottom, her name is Coraline. Became friends with her and actually stayed with her when I was later in France. In Ho Chi Minh, I stayed with a family friend. And it's a beautiful city, don't get me wrong, this isn't all of Vietnam, but this is what kind of really struck out to me. They had a museum that shows the Vietnam War from the Vietnamese perspective. So you can see on the left it shows Agent Orange, and it's really more of a positive image. My family friend has said it was more anti-American propaganda, but you can see pictures here. These are American soldiers kind of smiling over the corpses of decapitated Vietnamese. They had the guillotine there, and then these were investigations for U.S. war crimes issued by Hungary, and then this is another state from basically the UN. And it kind of just made me think, this isn't history that you would learn in America. And then here they had actually had a case of 2 babies. You couldn't really see inside, but they actually died from Agent Orange. My friends took me to a wonderful restaurant. It's actually all made of mushrooms, and this dish, it was like mushrooms wrapped around mushrooms, absolutely phenomenal. And we ordered another plate of that. I volunteered for 2 months in Nepal. This is the capital. Really interesting people. It's a developing country. People are incredibly nice. And I actually had several occasions where people would take me out and they wouldn't even let me pay, even for a $2 meal, and they knew I was a foreigner. So beautiful. This was the earthquake. Took down this a couple months after I was there. But you can see they're even very proud of their anatomy. Just kind of creative things there. This is the average house in Nepal, or at least in the capital and a lot of the countryside. All cement, built straight up, and they all have water containers. You can see that black on top. And then this was just a view from the countryside. I went hiking with kind of my Nepali friends, and they would take me into the countryside. We hike up in the mountains at 5 in the morning. Amarapuri, Nepal, this was the village I stayed in. So this was our cousin's house. The picture on the right, that I stayed on the bed on the left. My brother was on the right. He was a 21-year-old Nepali. He was a civil engineering student. The view on the bottom, that's actually straight from the house. That's the main highway going through the village, so pretty sparse. But across that highway, there's a house that was just blaring radio, and that was the way that the village would actually get their information. This guy was just blasting it. Picture on the right, I pay 25 cents and I get a lunch of chow mein. Absolutely delicious. This was the pharmacy that I worked at. This is Deepak. He had 4 bachelor's degrees in community health, general health, public health, and family health. And he was basically kind of the person during the week. The doctor would come 1 day a week on weekends. Great pharmacy there, and then kind of rooms going back. It was one room to see patients. There's a lab, there's a procedural room, and et cetera. Just showing that there's kind of a lot of fun things. That was my Nepali brother, Asok, on the left, and his friend, we call him Punk's Not Dead. His name was Vivek. This was the food. I had this twice a day for 2 months, and I did not get sick of it. Every single meal is slightly different, but absolutely delicious. So it's a combination of rice, curry, spinach. I had milk and curd and everything. This picture captures a lot, in the sense that these are Indian migrant workers, and they come here and they kind of do the menial, unskilled labor jobs. And so I asked the Nepali if there's anybody starving, and they said, well, in the country, and they said, well, probably only the Indian beggars. They're kind of the low people in the society. And then when I was in India, I had a taxi cab driver, and I asked him, what do you think of the Nepali? And he said, oh, they're all dirty people. And I was like, well, that's funny because they think you're dirty people. And I looked into it a bit more, and it's that the Nepali, they only see kind of the migrant workers, and really the low skilled jobs. And then the Indians, they see the Nepali male workers, young men who kind of travel away from home, and they drink and they gamble. So the Indians don't really get a good perspective of them. But you can really see how both parties kind of think. Depending on the circumstances, they get certain opinions of each other. Chitwan National Park, this is where I went. It was kind of voluntourism, so half the time you volunteer, the other half you're kind of a tourist. Little cottage I stayed at, rode elephants. They're protecting the one-horned rhino in Nepal. It's the only place in the world it is. We took a canoe ride and they gave us sticks, so in case any of these alligators come, you could whack them on the nose, I guess. And they also had a Taru cultural house, so it's the local people of the Nepal from that region. Did Poon Hill Trek. I met up with 4 other volunteers. When I went back here, I realized that when I was volunteering, I hadn't seen another foreigner for a couple weeks, so it was actually kind of weird to see white people again. But again, so it was a really fun day hike, 4 or 5 days. The chickens on the mountains, crosses between eagles and chickens, so they're just enormous. But the other volunteers did kill one and have ate it one night. So you can see on the left, that's the picture I got. If you want to be a bit more realistic, you're up there with a bunch of other foreigners. I'm Maripuri, Nepal. So coming back, so on the left, that's a snapshot from my travel blog. These are just the stats. I could see what countries were looking. So it's pretty cool. I was developing an international network. This is kind of the tourist version of the food. It's a lot of just touristy things. This is actually a teacher at the school that I volunteered at afterwards, and she took me home and she went out and bought paneer. And cooked this for me, and it was absolutely phenomenal. So you can see really just 2 different types of cultural experiences, and I'm a bit taller than they are. Amari English, so this was a boarding school that I taught at. I taught grades 3 through 10. Just some funny things. X in the alphabet is Christmas, and then capsaicin is bell peppers. But just I had a great time teaching. They're very enthusiastic people, very nice and everything. And then they had a competition. Okay. Leaving Nepal, I did rafting for a couple days, and I went in even a more rural area. So I realized that the place I was staying at was pretty nice. On the upper left, people were living in these one-room cement buildings on the hillside, and that was their house. The picture in the middle, I went rafting, and it was funny. So that's the highway right there. And there's a guy who's going around collecting piles of plastic and trash and everything. And I thought he was going to go back afterwards and pick them all up. He was actually just going down the line and lighting them on fire. So all that smoke, that's actually just plastic smoke. And you had everybody in the highway driving through that. Last day in Nepal, it was actually the birthday of Prem Rawat. He's an international spokesperson for peace. And I listened to 2 talks. One he gave to the UN and one he gave to the London kind of high royal court. And that talk really gave me some more ideas later for peace and what that means. I went to Varanasi. So across North India, I had a driver, and they booked all my hotels. I'm just going to run through these quickly. Varanasi is a very holy city. A lot of people go there to die. So all that firewood, that's actually to burn people. On the bottom left, I had this tourist shop. There was a lassi. I had a cashew saffron lassi. And the 20 minutes I was there, they carried 4 bodies by me towards the Ghats, the steps. And you can see people treated, it's a very holy city, people clean their clothes and wash in the river. Northern India, fascinating temples, the architecture, thousands of years old, just magnificent. So there's forts there, Taj Mahal in Agra, pretty beautiful for the sheer size and the detail in the marble. Rantapur, we did a tiger safari, so we're in open jeeps and we saw wild tigers. I was a little scared when it was coming closer. But Bundi, again, in a temple, fascinating, beautiful artwork. Udaipur, there's a fort there, and so my driver, to his hotel, that was 1/10 the price of mine, and I actually had more fun at that hotel because I was hanging out with all the other drivers. The picture on the bottom left, to me, it just really captured the creativity of the Indian people and their artistic nature. And I'll just say on the upper right, so we're driving through, my driver stops and he pays this guy to feed some cows, and he said that was a way for practicing his religious beliefs. Jodhpur on the left, that's the blue city. Jaipur is the red city. And there's a really cool exhibit on the astronomy from around the world. And I put this picture on the right. That's me on the far right. And there was an Italian family, and I actually stayed with one of the girls when I went to Italy later. Aurangabad, these caves built straight out of solid stone out of the hillside, so just magnificent. The picture in the middle, there's an Indian guy. I was talking to him in line. He was paying 10 rupees to go in. I was paying 250. Still like $4, but it was just kind of a funny little remark. Yeah, and these temples mostly unfinished and will probably never be finished. Goa, India, I took a vacation from traveling, if that sounds kind of weird. It's where Indians go to escape India. It's on the beach. It used to be a Portuguese colony. And this place, there was an Italian restaurant. They had tiramisu, and we had to actually book it a day in advance because it would go out through so quickly. The guy on the upper left, he's actually an English guy. He teaches Chinese English in England. And I met up with him. He was in his 50s, and we rode 90 kilometers south, and we went beach hopping. So a really cool guy, talked a lot with him. This menu on the right is basically like the continental menu. And on the menu, they have the German one, the English one, the Israeli one, the French one, American, Indian, Israeli. Yeah, a really fun place. Alleppey, Kerala. Kerala is a fascinating state, and it completely contrasted with North India. So it's the only democratically elected communist state, as far as I'm aware. But everybody's very highly educated, developed. And it was just people like say good morning to me in the street, and just, they're not trying to sell me anything. I did a little stint. I paid a guy for a couple of days. I did Ayurvedic treatments, and he taught me a bit of Ayurvedic just to kind of learn the basics. This was kind of the table, but it was a lot of oils, and basically you go in and you only wear that cloth. So Trivandrum, and this was South India. This was kind of my last stop before leaving kind of the developing world, so it kind of marked a big spot for me. This guy on the left, so I was at this temple and I didn't want to go in because you had to kind of undress and everything. And there's a lot of people, and they were just kind of curious about me. So I showed them my American passport. I showed them a $20 bill just because they were curious. And I knew they weren't going to rob me, and they didn't rob me or anything. But it's just really nice people. Next to the hotel is a restaurant. And the owner of the restaurant came down and started talking to me. And then his son came by, and his son had actually studied abroad in England, and he was just happy to speak to somebody in English. So he actually drove me to the airport at like 11 o'clock at night. Very grateful to him. So I flew to Dubai. This is kind of a layover, so I was there for a couple days. Fascinating city. It's in the United Arab Emirates. I went to the mosque there. I got stuck in LA traffic because I messed up my hotel. There's a museum that showed artistic calligraphy, and so I just really like that picture. And that little arrow, I think that was on the ceiling of my hotel, and I think that was a direction for what direction to pray in. Dubai, it's in the middle of the desert, but they've done phenomenal things there. That's a market of gold, and for 10 minutes you can walk down one way. And it's just storefront after storefront of just solid gold. In the shopping center, they have a ski resort, and you walk through, and it's actually really fascinating to see people in the contrast between Western styles and kind of the Middle Eastern style. So you can see the two storefronts there. And I remember I was walking through the shopping mall, and I saw this dad, or I heard giggling, and I saw this dad like waving 2 sheets of black cloth. I was like kind of confused, so I look, and it was just this dad, and like his 2 girls, and they're fully sheathed. But they were giggling away, and he was just kind of like swinging them back and forth in the mall. This is a Burj Khalifa, absolutely phenomenal. You stand next to it, and it literally just goes up into the sky. This is Palm Jeremiah. They GPS planted sand and built islands and houses and everything. So I was actually cutting a little short on time, so I went to the museum, and they had a really good expo on the artistic cultural exchange with Europe and everything. And the only reason we know about Aristotle today during the European Middle Ages is that the Middle East kept Aristotle. So we have them to thank for that. And then I actually like this. They had a model of the astronomy site in India that I had just been to, coincidentally. St. Petersburg in Russia. To me, this was kind of like Kyoto to Japan. To me, this is the cultural city in Russia. And it was just phenomenal. I want to show this picture just to show that I was staying at youth hostels, and incredibly cheap. This was when all the economic sanctions were going against Russia. So my price dropped in half when I was paying for a week. I paid, I think, like $45 for a week. This is the Hermitage. It's up there comparable to the Louvre in terms of museums. In this picture on the right, it's basically a hallway, and you go straight down, and on every ceiling they have a scene from the Bible, so they depict that in 13 scenes. I went to Pushkin. This girl on the left, she worked at the hostel, Lyra, and the guy, his name is Jean-Philippe. He's a French guy. He actually lives about 40 kilometers from my family in France. So I met up with him later in the trip. But this was just showing kind of the royalty. That's the Queen Elizabeth II and just her palace. I stumbled in on a church during a service. It happened to be Sunday. I didn't know. It was just to see the religious fervor for their faith was the exact same facial expressions I saw in the Buddhist temples in Japan. So to me, things started to come together. I stumbled upon this. I was crossing the bridge. This was January, and I was actually really lucky. I thought it was going to be like -30. It was only -5 degrees Celsius. So I was happy about that. But that's actually a shrine, and at the end is a shrine of it's Jesus Christ. And people would go into the water, and this was on January 19th, and it's Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, and they would actually kind of replicate or mimic that, I guess, birthing. I'm not exactly sure. Beautiful church in St. Petersburg. Everything is murals, and it just struck me for how they could capture kind of the facial expressions and the agony just through little stones. And you could see, you look up, and it's just everything is like that. I saw a Russian ballet for the Nutcracker and kind of another piece for a highlights reel, and it was just phenomenal. Just to think that it just blew me away. I've seen a lot of art pieces and people moving, but the way these Russians moved in this ballet was just absolutely great. The picture on the upper right, there's a bit of a story to it. So I was hanging out with a French guy and also Max, he's a Latvian, and we went to a karaoke bar 3 nights in a row just because it was a lot of fun. But especially from California, people love you, and I was surprised. So they had me like get up to the bar and sing Californication and California Dreaming, and they're like, he's from here, and everyone's like, woo! And but there's a Russian soldier there, and he's actually in the Navy, and he told me that, even though they say there's no Russian soldiers in Ukraine, they're all there, they're just not wearing their uniforms. But I held up my drink and I said, let's have a toast, and he right away, without even thinking, he said, I toast a peace. And it really struck me for thinking that here's a soldier, and I said, how could you be, against Putin? You're Russian, they're all for that. And I said, no, really, it's only in Moscow. A lot of the people, they're very much into, they like him a lot, but a lot of the people really don't like it. So it really started to separate the government from the people for me. This was a Nepali shawl that I actually lost, and to me it captured a lot of the memories in Nepal. It was just the idea that if I tell people I lost a scarf, it really wouldn't mean anything to anybody else. But for me, it meant a lot. So it started opening me up to the idea that when people say something, it's based on their experiences and that I don't know about, so I have to respect that. When I went to Prague, I actually stayed with a guy, Vivek. So this was us in Thailand, and I stayed with him again in Prague. The menu's on the left. It's Czech Republic. It's a lot of meat. So it took me to a restaurant called James Dean. I had mac and cheese, and it was just phenomenal. It was just great. A lot of fun. Oh, when I was there, so after that, we met a girl at the bar, and she works on a cruise ship. And to go on this cruise ship for 1 week costs $1 million. And she was 26, and I thought she kind of had it made. So she paid for a lot of things later. But it was just crazy to think that, she said she was crossing the border with like 19 grand one time, and the limit was 10 grand. So she gave her friend 9 grand. They walked across the border, and a good friend handed it back. But it was just really interesting to see people. And then we met up with 2 Germans just randomly in the night, and we spent the whole night together. But it was really a lot of fun. In Vienna, Austria, again, it's really kind of an older city in the mentality, in the sense that it's just more classical. This was Steven. He's from Switzerland, and I actually stayed with him when I went to Switzerland later. The guy in the middle, he's English, and this girl in Prague, she used a swear word that I have never said before in my life, but she said it all the time. So the guy in the English, John, he did something kind of stupid, and I called him this swear word. And for 15 minutes, I felt really bad, so I went back and apologized to him. And he said, no, honestly, like, that was a good use of the word. You used it well. And I was like, okay, cool. Vienna, so very classical. So the statues just phenomenal. They can capture, veins and stones and everything. I met up with the guy in the bottom picture. He's from England. He's in his 10th year of medical education. Just kind of blew me away. But we actually met up with 2 German girls who were studying medicine in Hungary. And we went to this restaurant, and it's basically where all the famous people go. And you could just pick, what part of the cow you want to eat. So really fun experience. I went to Slovakia. It was just a day trip, and I actually forgot what country Bratislava was in. So for the day, I actually didn't know what country I was in. But there's a war museum, and it was to the Russians, because the Russians occupied Eastern Europe for a lot of this time. And it got kind of eerie, and on the bottom they had a little monument to peace and all that. And then on the train station said, "Wars belong into museums." In Budapest, I ended up staying with a lot of people. There's a free communism tour and a free Jewish tour. They take you around the city and everything. Beautiful city. So I stayed with a lot of Portuguese and Brazilians. I don't know why. But there's an outdoor skating rink, hot springs and everything. That picture right there, that was actually from the House of Terror. And it's where, this was in Hungary, and they said during the Nazi occupation, the Hungarians were so quick to target their own Jews that the Nazi commander from Germany said, my job is really easy, I don't have to do much. So at the end of that museum, it was really interesting to see, rather than put pictures of all the victims, for which I'm sure there are too many to count, they actually had pictures of all the perpetrators, of the people who worked there. And it really struck me that the faces I was seeing, I couldn't tell the difference between those people and the victims and the perpetrators. On the right, upper right, there's a series of bronze shoes, and that's to commemorate the Jews where they're forced to stand by the river and then they're shot. And then that's part of the ghetto wall that's still intact on the bottom right. I went to Belgrade in Serbia, and it's really interesting going there. It's literally like walking back into the 1950s. Not only was it cloudy, but just mentally, I was talking to people, and they said men are very macho, women are very Barbie-esque. And this was from buildings they actually preserved, partially bombed from the 1999 NATO bombings. Because the government wasn't providing equal rights to all of their citizens. And just a fascinating story. So the lady I stayed with, through couch surfing one time, she said she got pregnant and her father didn't want her to have the baby. So he paid the doctor, convinced his daughter that she needed to go see him. Without her knowing, the doctor performed an abortion on her. And then, so she was very angry about that. Her friends wanted to protect her. The father beat himself up, made false police reports that attacking her, and had filing restraints put against them. So it's just crazy to think how a system designed to protect people could actually be manipulated. And I was actually this was on a train. This is somebody else's wine, but it was actually a bottle cap, which was kind of crazy. Sofia, Bulgaria. So on the upper left, you can see street level. That's modern level. There's a church right there that was medieval, and then under the city of the ground level that I'm standing on is actually the Romans. And you can see a lot of, they actually have preserved Roman roads. Again, they're very proud. They put a mosque and a church on the same intersection, saying, we're very proud of being diverse and accepting. Again, you see more monuments to the Russians. That building right here, this was used as the Russian parliament during their occupation. And during their occupation, there was a giant red star, and everybody thought it was made of solid red ruby. And then when they took it down in '89, they found it was just made of cheap glass. Here's a building through a free walking tour. They paint a bunch of people, and there's a little baby here. And the guy who made it painted the baby's penis gold, and he lost his job after that. Plovdiv, Bulgaria. I just saw this through the news, so I just thought I'd stop by. It's the city of 7 hills, but there's only 6. One of them was destroyed to just completely pave the entire city. Again, they have a model, but you can see there's original Roman arena steps. Here, the house is really beautiful in the sense that people paid property taxes for the size of the first floor, so they built the second floor is a lot bigger to get more living space. All this food, there's like 3 drinks. I had dinner with 2 Germans I met on the tour. All that cost $6. So it's just very, very cheap, very efficient. Istanbul, Turkey. Oh, on the way to Turkey, I was going by bus, and at the I was the only non-Bulgarian and non-Turkish guy, and I was growing out kind of the goatee and stuff. And they asked me if I was Muslim. My plans had just changed. I didn't have a flight out of the country. I didn't have a hotel reservation. I didn't have basically any contacts. And they stopped me at the border and asked if I was trying to get into Syria, because at that time, I handed them a French passport, and half of all the Europeans entering Syria and to join ISIS were actually French. So it was an interesting experience. Istanbul, I didn't know what I was expecting. It was a lot more European than I thought. I met a lot of people. It was normal over dinner to have 4 or 5 languages going on. But the most beautiful part about Istanbul was really the mosques. So here, this is Hagia Sophia. Oh, and I just want to go back. This was a view from the hostel, so you can see it right there. And then the mosques were just beautiful. You can go in. You just kind of respectfully take off your shoes and observe. It's just absolutely beautiful. And this is the Blue Mosque. This is inside the Hagia Sophia. Just absolutely phenomenal. So this is a clip from my blog, and it's just to show that all the people that I had been meeting earlier on this trip, I had actually stayed with later. So basically for the next 8 countries or so, I didn't pay for food, I didn't pay for housing, I was just staying with friends that I met previously on the trip. So in Italy, I met this lady, I gave her a ride in India, and she lived in Rome. So Daniela, and I'm kind of gonna zoom through Western Europe a little bit. I had lunch on top of St. Peter's Basilica, beautiful, a lot of Roman ruins. In Florence, I stayed with my cousins, my aunt. They'd come to Florence to visit, so I met up with them. This is my doppelganger from 400 years ago in a painting. But again, the statues, just really magnificent artwork to see how they can capture the muscles and everything, out of stone. Milan, I stayed with, this was the lady at that, in India, northern India, when we dressed up. This, in the middle is a statue I really liked at All the Anatomy. There's an expo on Charlie Hebdo, and these are kind of just jokes. So again, Charlie Hebdo, it's when terrorists went into a comedy a rioting and in Paris, and they shot all the rioters. So this says, find the differences between a pencil and a bullet. It says the whole world is equal. So there's a religious, the atheist, I guess, is a condom, and then there's a humorist, which is a ghost. And then here it says the dead are the ones that lose the war. This is Stephen. I was the guy I met up with in Vienna. Rivella, that's milk serum. They took out all the fat and they end up with a very sweet drink. Beautiful place in Switzerland. In Germany, these are the 2 German volunteers that I worked with in Nepal. I just like this picture. It's made in West Germany. Just think how long that cardboard box has been there. But they took me into their villages in the Black Forest. It's absolutely beautiful. Sabrina's village is on the bottom left, and there was 700 people. A really good experience. And I went skiing with Max later. And then that picture on the right here, this is actually a church in the middle of the Black Forest. It's circular. It's all made out of white marble and everything. Dijon, France, and Brussels, Belgium. I stayed with 2 friends I made when I was studying abroad in Montreal. And I just like this. They had a wine shop next to a bread shop, I think next to a cheese shop. And then this was Dijon, so they had a moutarderie mustard, place where they make mustard. And in Brussels, I stayed with my friend, and we had fries for dinner. In Amsterdam, I just kind of zoomed up quickly to see a friend I met in Vienna as well. We stumbled in on a student occupation of a building, and really the one thing that struck me was that 30 years ago when we said a university, we meant the faculty, and nowadays when we say university, we mean the administration. So it's really kind of trying to bring the students to get back in control. I don't have time for that. And then I stayed with a friend. This was Coraline. I met her at the safari park in Thailand. So I met up with her in Lyon. And this is actually the city where my dad grew up. So he kind of gave me some pointers on where to go. This was our dinner. So I had Turkish delights I brought from Istanbul. We had a full block of cheese, macaroons, some scones, and then my German friend, his father gave me some American marshmallows to feel better. When I got to Valence and Aubenas, this was the first time seeing my family in a long time. So this is my grandfather, and he told me that, I guess when you get older, they tell you a bit more about their history. But he was actually there in the resistance in France, and while he didn't actually shoot Germans, but he said he was there when they captured them and lined them up against a wall. And he offered me this 1916 German rifle from World War I, and he's like, just take it. I was like, I can't travel with this. And then I went to later Obana. This is my grandmother. She had fallen, so my dad had actually flown in to kind of take care of things, but she was doing rehab, and she's 91. I thought this was only in France. You buy 3 pizzas, you get a free bottle of wine. And then this was my cousin's daughter that I'd seen for the first time. That's my other cousin. All right, in Po, this is where the other half of my family is. This was the French guy I met. He was actually doing his PhD research in St. Petersburg, but he lives in southern France. So I met up with him again. This was at a church, so I stayed with my cousins, and there was a church in like a little social room, and they had a dancer for some guy, and the guy's girlfriend wasn't too happy being there. But it was, so, and I'll just go through this. On TV, you see advertisements that say like, there's too much cholesterol, like watch, you want to be healthy and exercise. So I met up with my grandmother, and she was a 91-year-old woman. She was reading a book, and I asked her, what book are you reading? I was like, 91. She said, well, I'm reading about World War II. And I was like, oh, kind of typical, it's from that history. But she told me the next thing she said was, the people she's reading about in that book, she knew personally. And that's what really struck me. And she said there was a Jewish boy who would go through the city, and one day he just disappeared. So, and I asked her about Charlie Hebdo and the comedians, and she said, even that, even hiding behind the fence of humor, they were going a bit too far. So I went to Bayonne and Biarritz. This is, you can see the French and the Spanish. It's an area, they call it Little California. It's great for surfing. My cousin's boyfriend went up and he took me there. And I was actually going through photo albums, and from 30 years ago, I saw my mom had wedding photos taken here. So it was pretty cool to see. In Montreal, I stayed with family from friends that I met, pole vaulting friends when I was studying abroad there. And I had dinner with another friend. I worked with her with the ALS patients at the Montreal Neurological Institute. So it's good to just catch up. Stopped by my older brother's place in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we went to a service. This was for Easter. And on the first service was a bit contemporary. The grandfather was in the bell choir, so I went to a more contemporary thing. And it really struck me that during the sermon, he used a lot of language about fear and terrorism, and it just really struck me that it was hard to come out of that thinking clearly. And then we went to a younger service that was more like a rock concert, and it was actually, you kind of get chills just being there. So that's my older brother, and then just comparing it like this is traditional America. I stopped by my other brother's place in Chicago. He was doing his master's in data analytics, and I actually listened in on one of his lectures. It was about the paradoxes in data analysis, and actually a lot of that analysis, it fit in right exactly where what I was thinking and preparing. This was a sign. I didn't know a heart attack feels differently to a woman. And then basically when I got home, that's basically everything I had. So that was my bag and everything. And in North India, I got really sick and everything, and I was borderline about to fly home and everything, but there's a tailor, so I actually had this made there, and that was my Christmas present to myself. So it's just one other thing. Oh yeah, so on the flights, flying back to San Jose, there's a grandma next to me, and she was visiting her grandkids and everything in San Jose, and she's like, oh, I'm going to Hawaii this summer. I said, oh, I was just in Thailand. It's cheap, it's beautiful, it's safe, you'd enjoy it. And she said, oh, Thailand, they have tsunamis there. And I was like, yeah, but not all that frequently. So I told her, I was like, oh, you're going to Hawaii? Watch out, I heard there may be another Pearl Harbor coming. And she looked at me and she said, really? And I was like, no, it's just the fear that she bought into so quickly kind of shocked me that, what we say, has a lot of impact on our beliefs. So this is a picture, this quote, paralysis by analysis, this is from my coach at San Diego. And it was the idea that, pole vaulting is a very technical sport. You get a bunch of nerds. You can paralyze yourself by overthinking things. So it kind of sounds familiar. So I just want to harp on the point that there's a lot of things to analyze just for the sake of doing so, but I really try to hone in on the important things. So this is part one, travel. Just to kind of summarize, we went through Asia, starting in Japan, went all the way to the US. So part two, oh no, I'm doing on time. Let me see. Okay. All right, we're going to go a bit faster. So part two, person to person. So this goes into everything that goes between two people. So travel, there's a lot of ways to travel. I go into that. Values and culture, the very core, our culture reflects our values, and if you take a look at the culture and the movies that we make, they're actually kind of a proxy for the values that we hold. And you look at, like, you know, even presidential candidates, they're reflecting, they're a proxy for the values that are prominent. Language, our language is very impactful. I'm sure we all know this, but one thing I learned when talking with people about a lot of things, if somebody says, I like apples, well, okay, we say, okay, they like apples, but they didn't say, I love apples. They didn't say, I love oranges. They didn't say, well, I don't like apples. So just by listening to the language people use, you can become very attuned to the values that they actually hold. And in that way, I can use words that reflect their vocabulary. And kind of encourage them to speak up more. So education, it's a tool for oppression. It's a tool for bringing people out of oppression. Marriage, there's a cultural component to marriage. We think arranged marriages aren't a great thing, but really online dating and like setups, that's all kind of arranged marriages. So there's a cultural barrier there. Children, this kind of ties back to 3 cups of tea when the guy was going back into Pakistan, and we use children for like their innocence, and you know, there's a lot of values that we wish that children have that we wish we could bring into an adult society. And it really struck me, like the movies that we've geared for children, it's all about people coming together, and then you look at the movies we gear for adults, and it's all about, you know, killing the person who doesn't look. Happiness, we think it's a universal emotion, but there's a cultural component. You know, what do you value that will affect what you find happiness in? Silence, again, there's a cultural component to it. Loss, like kind of that scarf, you want to get that person's story and really understand what people are experiencing. Internal and external beliefs, this came from a guy in Goa. He was a guy on the motorcycle. And we talked to him a bit more, and he got me introduced to the idea that there are beliefs that we portray that you can see easily, and then there's a lot of internal beliefs that you don't necessarily come across easily. Individuality, when you put all this together, what does it mean to be an individual? Life, the value of life. There's a guy in Nepal, he said, I like to travel on the tourist buses because if one of those crashes, I know there will be help, but if a local bus with a bunch of Nepali crashes, nobody's really going to care. So we really got, and with Ebola, when 2 Americans got Ebola, we treated them, but really not everybody else. So it really got me into questioning, what's the value of life? In what cases is human life not very valuable, and in what cases is it valuable? Reflection, yeah, if I had more time. So this is the idea that kind of by proxy is like we see ourselves in a lot of society, and then society sees itself in a lot in us as well. So it's just this conversation that goes back and forth that we don't necessarily see. Picking and choosing, we can pick and choose, you know, whatever materials serve our best needs, but really in the long run, that's not necessarily the best thing. Dimensions, this is kind of where I differ from Malcolm Gladwell and the idea of blink. He uses the idea of thin slicing. So when you see somebody, you make a judgment, you thin slice them. It's really hard to thick slice them, which is the opposite. So I use the language of single dimensions and multiple dimensions. So for example, if somebody came to interview here at the school and they only interviewed with an anatomist, they would think, oh, medicine is full of anatomy at that school. Well, that's not necessarily true. They just had a single dimension of that school, and now they have a misunderstanding. But we do this with people all the time. We get one experience of a person and we make a judgment about the whole group. So it's really recognizing that we can have you know, partial understandings at times and what we need to do to fix that. So part 3, person to people, it starts out with groups. Really found and the thing that ties groups together is their values, and groups can be as small as a couple people to a school, to even to a country. Those groups come together to form a society, and the U.S. is unique in that regard. We have groups of so many different values coming together, and with all that, you create a lot of diversity. And with that so much diversity, how do you keep an honor system intact? Politics, it's a very interesting discussion in the sense that politics is everywhere, but it's really this lack of enthusiasm to engage in politics only in the United States that I found that's kind of hindering. And for example, there's a guy in India, and I asked him, and he said he knew about, there's a case where a toddler had shot its mother 2 days earlier in the States, or, you know, across the world. And he said, oh yeah, I knew about that. Versus, you know, here I can ask people the names of political candidates in December and they don't even know who the people are. And it's not to speak badly about people, it's just the culture and the values have completely changed. So it's really comparing and contrasting. History, whoever writes history gets to dictate, what people learn, and you see history repeats itself. So speaking in terms of healthcare, we used to have community health, and now we came to hospitals, and we specialized, and now we're kind of coming back to primary care, and we're realizing that's an important component. Privacy, can go on that. Religion, again, you can kind of saw that I went into Buddhist temples in Japan and Thailand. I went to Hindu temples in Nepal and India. I went to mosques all over. I went to churches all over. So really putting all that together. War, and this kind of goes back onto dimensions. The essence of war in its traditional sense has been you shoot the person that doesn't look like you. But now war is changing in the sense, and it's becoming more of an ideology. And the old tactics that we used to identify who is a bad guy really isn't holding up anymore. So to fight these wars on terror, it's not that you need more guns, but really we need to start reframing our mind and understanding people better. Terror and fear, there's a lot. When I was in Asia, I didn't feel any sense of terror, and it wasn't only until I came back to Europe that there's like this sense of terror. So there's that. Humor, Charlie Hebdo, huge conversation about that. Peace. Time, and these are all cultural components, and depending on your experience, that affects your understanding. And these are just kind of fun things. So take-home messages: the world is made of people, not governments. Most people are good. It is easy to criticize the past and even easier to forget it. It is hard to learn how to analyze the past and even harder to apply lessons from it. So like we said with the pebbles, there's a lot of noise out there, but unless we really start to understand how to analyze and understand people from all over, we're just going to be kind of running circles. And through a greater understanding of people, we can improve our mentality, our behavior, and our environments for greater mutual benefit. So here's a case. So you're walking through Istanbul, it's freezing outside. This has actually happened to me. So I was wearing a winter coat, I had winter boots, I had camel wool socks, and I was still cold because I'd been walking out for a while. And there's a girl, and she was wearing nothing but thin pants, and she was freezing. So what are your options? Take the child to a restaurant for a hot meal. Do you ignore the child, keep walking? Do you give money? Do you give food? Or do you adopt the child and take him back with you? So I made a scheme for this. And really, whenever we see something that happens in the world, we want to make sure that we really understand it for its full in-depth quality. So if we don't understand something, I'm not asking, actually I am asking. So I'm going to say reserve your judgment and your action. So really until you fully understand a story or a current event from the other person's perspective, I would say go back and learn more information. And only after you understand that person and you speak to them and you learn their story, make a judgment and a plan of action. And once you do, support it. So thank you very much. And there's just a little bit of fact about the book at the end. So thank you. Appreciate it.